Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight, we have an excellent panel, and we are going to be discussing social services during COVID and beyond. I am so honored to be joined by amazing panelists from across the Peel region who will be providing their perspectives. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight to have this important conversation as we all navigate the pandemic and plan for after as well. It's very important that we have these conversations so that we're prepared for what the future has in store. So I want to thank each and every single one of you for taking the time out of your schedule to join us to have this very, very important conversation. Tonight, we're joined by an excellent panel, which includes my co-host, Jackie Taylor, who is the Labor Liaison and Donor Relations Representative with United Way GTA, who's serving as my co-host. So thank you so much, Jackie, for joining us tonight. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Sarah, for having me.
Thank you. Before we get started tonight, I just wanted to have us, although we're, having a conversation in the digital realm, I think it is still very important that we start with a land acknowledgement and understand the place that we are all starting from. So I'd like to start by just sharing a bit of a land acknowledgement here. We would like to start our event today by acknowledging the Indigenous people whose traditional territory we have gathered on today. For thousands of years, this land has been on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and Métis. We ask that we bring our hearts and minds together in our shared purpose and commitment to ourselves and to the ongoing process of reconciliation and learning about our shared values. It's so important that we start these conversations off by acknowledging our place on these lands, but understanding that we all have a role to play in making sure that we are working with Indigenous communities towards reconciliation, but that we are respectful of the lands that we are on. So I'm very grateful to be able to acknowledge that place that we are starting from as settlers, but to ensure that this conversation, even that we're having today, too, does have that lens of understanding the work that we need to do in our communities to ensure that all members of our province are included, especially the original peoples. So I'm very, very honored to, have us frame the conversation in that way. A few weeks ago, I actually held a town hall with Indigenous leaders, and we chatted about some of the challenges that they are facing in terms of reconciliation. We also chatted about some of the challenges they are facing with respect to access to social services, not only during COVID, but throughout the year. And I think it really helps us frame the conversation we're having today, as we're going to talk about many of those challenges that people in our communities are facing throughout this pandemic. I guess at this point, what I'll do is I'll throw it over to my co-host, Jackie, who will start by introducing some of our panelists. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm honored and privileged to introduce my first three panelists. Angela Carter. Angela Carter is the Executive Director, a charitable multi-service organization, Roots Community Services, Inc. Angela volunteers with the CESO, through which she has worked with First Nation communities in Northern Ontario, along with many years of voluntary service in the Greater Toronto Area. A journalist and a communicator by profession, Angela has a strong interest in social change and is an avid, lifelong learner. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I will also introduce Gurpreet Malhotra. Gurpreet is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Indus Community Services, a leading provider of culturally responsive community and health services. Formerly, Mr. Malhotra was the Director of Strategic Planning, Policy and Partnerships in the Human Resources Department at the Region of Peel. He previously served as a senior policy advisor at the Ontario Ministry of Community and Social Services. He also has more than a decade of experience as both a professor and a program coordinator. Welcome, Gurpreet. I'll introduce my very last panelist, and her name is Afat Gassami. Afat, the executive director of Newcomer Centre of Peel. She has obtained her master's degree in immigration and settlement studies at Ryerson University, and she is continuing her PhD studies in family relations and human development at the University of Guelph. She is a motivational speaker, mentor, and role model to her peers in immigrant communities. She is a strong advocate for the women's rights, children, youth rights, for the seniors on living well and aging with dignity and respect, and the overall well-being of the family. Welcome, Afat.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to introduce the next three panelists. In total, we've got 6 folks, so it's a big panel, but I'm going to introduce Laura Zilny, who is the Executive Director of Hope 24/7. Laura has over 16 years of experience in healthcare and business and is a registered psychotherapist and board-certified sexologist. She also holds graduate degrees in international affairs, counseling psychology, human sexuality, and business administration. Laura is committed to providing best-in-class, client-centered care and is a lifelong advocate for mental health. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Next, we're also joined by Kenneth Solomon. Kenneth is the Executive Director of Labor Community Services of Peel. He is an internationally trained lawyer in common law practices with a master's degree in human rights and a bachelor's in law. He has assisted clients before Service Canada Board tribunals during his tenure at the Labor Community Services of Peel. Thank you so much for joining us, Kenneth. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Yasmin Youssef. Thank you for joining us. Yasmin is the National Manager of Nisa Homes, the largest group of transnational shelters for Muslim women and children in Canada. She has almost a decade of experience in the social services field, including in working in mental health and union advocacy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
It's amazing that we have such a wide range of panelists with such diverse experiences. I'm really looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have today. I'm going to turn it over to Jackie, who's going to lead us off with our first question.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to ask a series of questions, and I'll call on each and every panelist by your agency name for you to answer the question. So can you tell us about yourself and your role at your not-for-profit organization? And I'll go first with Nisa Homes. Yasmin?
Sure. What I basically do is I oversee the homes that we have. We do have 6 homes across Canada. They're transitional homes, which means they're second stage homes for women and children that are fleeing abuse, experiencing homelessness, or just facing any sort of difficulty that is causing them to need shelter, safe shelter. And we usually assist women that are immigrant, non-status, refugee, women and children. And we have 2 homes here in the GTA, so one in Mississauga and one in Scarborough. And we basically try to support them in getting back on their 2 feet. A lot of them obviously are coming to us having experienced trauma, having experienced a lot of abuse, and in addition to immigration issues, refugee issues, legal issues, all of that stuff. So there's a lot of layers that we're trying to remove to help them in becoming independent, self-sufficient. Even though they stay with us for only 3 months, the ultimate goal is we want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet once they move out.
Thank you, Yasmin. Angela Carter, can you tell us about yourself and your role at your not-for-profit organization?
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to both Sarah and to you, Jackie. I'm the Executive Director of Roots Community Services, and we are formerly United Achievers Community Services. We're based in Brampton, but we have an office in Mississauga as well. And we've actually just moved and started to do some work in Halton region with the Halton Children's Aid Society. We run programs from ages 6 to seniors. So we do have a breadth of programs we run. We've tried to reach as many of our population within the Peel region especially. And we focus primarily on the Black, African, and Caribbean communities. And so we have from age 6, we actually run in a virtual summer camp right now, but we usually have during the school year, we have what is called the ALT Club, Arts, Literacy, and Tutoring. And then we have the summer camp in the summer. We have, for the youth, we have a youth outreach worker program, enhanced youth outreach worker program, that's funded through the Ministry of Community, MCCSS. Children, Community, and Social Services, and that we work with youth who are having problems coping with addiction, mental health issues, and those things. So they have clinical intervention. And we also have a youth entrepreneurship mentoring program where we work with youth 16 to 24 years that are aspiring to be entrepreneurs who have, some of them have started their own business. Some of them are looking to have a hobby that they can monetize, and they're looking to get the benefits from that. And they are matched with mentors who help them through that program and really help them to develop a business plan and to be able to, a strong plan that they can use to promote their new business. And they work towards having a grant at the end of the program as well. We have a Violence Against Women's program where we work with women and the children who are suffering from the trauma of abuse. And so that's counseling, we do counseling there. And we also work with Peel Children's Aid Society. We counsel parents who are involved with the society, and we try to help them with techniques and tools, and help them to be able to work with their children and bond with their children to get their children out of the care or out being involved with CAS. We do a similar program for the youth and their families in Halton. And then we have our seniors program, a very vibrant seniors program, in which we have over 300 members, and from the very, very active that they would do Zumba and yoga and those things to those who are in homes. So we have a wide array of programs that we have for our seniors. And now we are starting a men's program as well to help men, especially those who are abusive and who are whose partners, may be coming to us because they're in an abusive situation. We're trying to help them to understand, for themselves to understand why are they abusing, and sometimes they don't even understand that they are being abusive. They don't see it as abuse, and so we'll be working with them to help them in that area and to be confident and find other ways of dealing with some of the issues they face. So that's quite a bit we do, and I'll stop there because probably more will come out later. Thank you.
Well, there's definitely a lot of moving parts there, and thank you for that. So can you tell us about yourself and your role at your not-for-profit organization, Laura?
Thank you for having me. So I'm the CEO at Hope 24/7, and that's a regional trauma center and the designated sexual assault center for the region of Peel. And so we've been around since 1993, and we work with all persons who are 12 years of age and older. We're a feminist organization, so that's how we approach our work, from an intersectional feminist lens, and also a trauma-informed and evidence-based lens, and that's why we're also accredited through Accreditation Canada. And so the staff are all regulated health professionals, and we work with individuals, families, couples, groups. So we have a very robust clinical program, and then on the flip side, we have a very robust prevention and outreach program where we're predominantly in middle schools and high schools on a weekly basis. That's going to obviously change with the new directions of the pandemic. But we're in with them weekly, and we work with the families and teachers. It's a real wraparound program to try to provide additional supports and leadership opportunities, as well as mental health skills, coping, grounding, resources, and a trusted adult that they can land on. That's us.
Thank you. Thank you. And Gurpreet, can you tell us about yourself and your role at your not-for-profit organization?
Yes, thanks, Jackie. Indus Community Services is 35 years young. We were going to have a large event this year, but we'll have to put that up to number 36. We have 7 locations, about 110 plus staff, and in normal circumstances, 1 in Oakville, 2 in Mississauga, and 4 in Brampton. we've got 3 large areas of service. And I won't go into too much detail, but invite people to come to the website to get more. We do a lot of work to support newcomers, settlement, employment, language instruction, etc. A great deal of work to support seniors, senior wellness programs, like Angela, about 300 seniors in those weekly groups. And we work with seniors who have dementia, Alzheimer's, and other frailties. So we provide them with a culturally responsive service at 3 of our sites, focused on their supports in a way that is as welcoming and as supportive as possible. The third area that we have within the organization is family services, and that's counseling to support those who are experiencing violence in the home, parent-child conflict. We also have a project with the Children's Aid Society that provides a cultural lens that is responsive to the needs of the community, and other supports, like mental health supports, and a new program that we're working on around supporting the 2S LGBT communities. So my role there essentially is to keep all of those different pieces moving properly, moving forward, using evidence-based research and trauma-informed interventions. We've been able we're very proud of the work we've been able to do. And as we go through the pandemic, very proud of the work we've adapted to do too.
Well, thank you for that. And Afat, can you tell us about yourself and your role at your not-for-profit organization?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. As you introduced me, Afat Qasimi, I'm the Executive Director of Newcomer Centre of Peel. I've been around, working with the newcomers and refugees and families in Peel region more than 2 or 3 decades. So I'm old enough to know every corner of Mississauga and Brampton. Not much Caledon, but Brampton and Mississauga. The program is very focused on settlement and integration of newcomers and refugees. The things that Gurpreet talked about, the one area of his work is, I'm not going to repeat it, is the same. It's a wraparound services. Our bigger funder is federal government. We have many funders. I have 120 more staff, full-time staff, and then rest of part-time or supplies. So we are in one location. We don't have more than one location. It's a big location. It's in the middle of, I think, I can say the old Mississauga, Standards and Confederation. So what I always thinking about why I stay so long in this business. So the only thing that I want to tell you that there's only one thing that I stayed, and I love my job. The reason is that I constantly in a position of learning and teaching. I listen so carefully to people, to community, to newcomers, to all of all different level of families, and then on the other side, I always wanted to learn and then not only be a teacher. I want to be a student all the time in my life. This is my fulfillment for the life till I die. So learning and teaching is my role. That's all I can say.
Well, you know what? That's a lot of moving parts, and it sounds like you're very passionate with what you do. So thank you so much for sharing. And Kenneth Solomon, can you tell us about yourself and your role at your not-for-profit organization?
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Sarah, for having me here on this panel. Before I begin, thank you once again. I am Kenneth Solomon, Executive Director of the Labour Community Services of Peel in Brampton. And presently, we are overseeing 2 programs, which is run by our organization. The one being the Help Center, and the other is Know Your Rights at Work. The Help Center basically pertains to providing free consultation, referrals, representation to clients on government income security programs. like the employment insurance, WSIB, CPP disability, and social insurance. It is pertinent to mention here, our organization is a project of the Peel Regional Labour Council and a member agency of the United Way of Greater Toronto. And our organization's uniqueness is very well established in the region of Peel community for a number of years. In the area of employment, we are dedicated to advocacy, reference, and education on employment standards, occupational health and safety, and human rights to clients who are wrongfully dismissed, have occupational health and safety issues, or have experienced or experiencing discrimination at their workplace. We actively assist clients in drafting demand letters to employers, file claims before the Ministry of Labour, and human rights applications before the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. We also provide representations at hearing and tribunal. And the best part is, it is all free service to all the clients. And as far as the Know Your Rights program is funded by the region of Peel, and that is dedicated to in-house, and we conduct outreach workshops, customized workshop training, and advocacy and self-advocacy development and frontline workers training as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'll hand it over to my co-host, Sarah, to introduce our next three panelists. Sarah?
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you to each one of you for sharing a little bit about your organization. My next question is very much connected to the first. Perhaps each of you could go into just a little bit more depth around who your organization serves and how have you had to pivot the services and supports you're providing to clients during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll start off with Angela from Roots Community Services.
Hi, thank you. Well, as I said earlier, we serve primarily from the Black, African, and Caribbean communities, and from age 6 to seniors. So we have a wide age range that we would serve. It was some of our programs before we were doing remotely, especially our counseling. A lot of our counseling we did in home counseling. So that was not difficult for the counselors who were working like that before. They were able to then just switch to home as opposed to being in the office and working. Obviously, they weren't going into people's homes during that period. We're starting gradually to look at how we would go back to doing that, but they switched to doing the home. What was difficult really was the seniors program, probably because they were very active and they loved to be out. And we had groups that met on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So having to switch and have to do activities from the home now and them being inside was interesting. But I found that with them, they were very actually accommodating. We had to talk to them more because instead of, we had to call them every day, or most of them, to make sure they're okay because they wanted to talk, they needed someone to speak to. So that increased our level of interaction with them. But they were, for the most part, there's some of them obviously that it was a major toll on them because of the isolation and stuff. But we were there to talk to them and a listening ear, and they were able to call when they wanted to talk to someone. So we really had to improve and to expand that service of the calls and being available for them. From the youth was difficult. A lot of our youth that we worked with were there were house surfing and couch surfing. Some of them were homeless, and they had more difficult time. Some of them had to go to hotspots to get their internet service. So they had difficult time having to stay in one place. So I find their mental health was more compromised in that way. They really, that was difficult. Our children, they adapted quite easily when we move online. Obviously, some of them were a bit finding it difficult, disturbing, I would say, but we were able to work with them. That was easier. And the other programs, the women were also a difficult group, that had a difficult group, because some of them were still with their partners, not able to talk freely. Some of them had issues with actually with visitation, for those who had visitation rights, and so a lot of issues came out of that. So we realized a lot of other issues surfaced during this time, and I'm sure the others will speak about it. And we had to be able to just quickly think on our feet a lot of times of how we're going to manage. Obviously, for our staff then they needed more to do more self-care, to be more aware of what they were also involved with, because they had to be coping with the changes within their homes of, you know, the COVID and everything, and also had to help others that were facing those problems. So they had to be doubly aware of the stress on them. So all of those things we had to be looking at and working with, and it made a big difference how we try to cope. So the mental stress, I think, on staff and on our clients have been really, really something that we're still working through. It is how we are still coping and managing, and I think it is something we really have to think about as we look to reopen, as we look to even move into our next age, I call it the new age, because it showed this pandemic really showed the effect or the impact that the social sector has on the community. The work the social sector does within the community, within society, to keep it working at a certain level. And when that is broken down, we can see really where that fallout and the stress and the distress and the problems will occur. So I think having to pivot staff-wise and client-wise and work with that. And then on top of that, being from the Black, African, and Caribbean communities, the anti-Black racism that came up, and so that's another layer added on top of our staff. The majority of our staff are from that community, from those communities. So yes, we've been grappling with quite a lot of issues, and we give an outlet to our staff to talk and to bring in others to talk to them and stuff. So it's been a difficult, different, and enlightening way of working.
Thank you so much for sharing, Angela. I think, you know, it was really interesting to hear all of the different communities that you serve and how each of those different demographics were impacted by COVID. And, you know, when we add in the anti-Black racism that is taking place in our communities, a lot of those concerns are amplified for many people. So thank you so much for sharing that and providing the perspective, not only of the clients, but also of your staff as well, because I think it's important to understand that they're humans too, and they are also navigating a pandemic while still trying to care for vulnerable people. So it is very important that we take care of our team members because, you know, at the end of the day, this is tough work that you all are doing, and, you know, it can take a toll on us. So taking care of yourselves is very, very important. So thanks for sharing that with us, Angela. I'm going to move it over to Laura from Hope 24/7. If you can maybe share with us, you know, obviously who some of your clients are, but what have been the major challenges that you have faced, and how have you had to pivot as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah, so because we work in the space of sexual violence, violence against women and girls, intimate partner violence, family violence, the vast majority of our service users are women and girls, or identify as such. And so that was kind of who we were working with. And then layered onto that, the vast majority of our service users are people of color because they're from the Peel community. And so we started to see some areas where we needed to step up our role, and some areas where we were challenged to come up with some new perspectives. So one area we needed to pivot was very much women and girls were being imprisoned with their abusers. So now you're in a confined space with nowhere to go, probably no technology. So by about mid-April, we started to get very clear calls from women to say, no more, we're cutting off communication because it's making the violence worse. And we hadn't yet got to this sign that was promoted by the Canadian Women's Foundation, that if you're on a meeting like this or you're talking to friends and you're experiencing violence, to do this so that people know that you need to get help. So this hadn't come out yet. And so we were struggling. We need to have eyes on these people because we were managing about 200 very, very high risk individuals. So if we looked at mental health on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is no distress and 10 is the highest distress that one can have, we work in that 8 to 10 range. So of those 200 people, there were several who were living in actively violent situations that we had previously assessed for being at risk of being murdered because of this. So this was a lot of sleepless nights trying to figure out what to do, and we decided to pull them together and offer necessities of life. So we got funding through the region to get gift cards, and we brought the women in. It was contingent upon you coming in, so we could get eyes on you, and we did an assessment, and then we could resource. In addition to the gift cards, we got funding through the United Way, through the Local Love Fund, and we put together reproductive health kits. And so these kits also included necessities. So we had menstrual cups and reusable pads to decrease their cost of living, as well as tampons and pads, but we also had condoms and lube, and we had complete instructions and the materials to make an ovulation bracelet so that the women could identify when they're at risk of becoming pregnant, and then use the strategies that we help them come up with to avoid becoming pregnant during that time. So that was a real pivot for us. A real different way of doing business and offering business. Another pivot point is we opened our doors to general mental health because we were hearing from other partners that they were becoming inundated, and we said, send them to us. We're all regulated health professionals. We handle anxiety and depression regularly anyway, so send them to us. So we opened it up, and it really it was kind of two camps. There were people calling that had never had a mental health issue ever. And this was the first time, and it was brought on by the isolation. And they were now diagnostically in the anxiety and depression categories. And then we had a group where this isolation exacerbated their existing mental health issues. And so suicidality and self-harming behaviors were becoming more prevalent. And so we worked in that space with those general mental health. Then we opened our doors broader to males that are abusive, so we can provide both ends. We have worked in that space anyway because violence is often gray, but we made it more expansive and shared that information with our partners so that they could refer folks to us. And then the last piece where we really pivoted is racial trauma. And this came up, and it increasingly came up towards the end of May into June. And it was superseding the violence, the sexual violence and family violence that people were experiencing with all of the cases of things happening locally as well as in the States. And it was bringing up issues of identity, suicidality, self-harming, where do I fit into this world? And so we had to find a way to pivot and provide services for that. And so we've done online groups, and we're working on some other good things for the team as a whole to kind of move forward.
Thank you, Laura. It's very interesting to see how you pivoted and evolved what you're providing in the community. I think it's amazing that you were able to adapt and make sure that no one was being left behind in this conversation. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to pass it over to Gurpreet from Indus. If you can share with us sort of who your clients are, but also how you've had to pivot throughout COVID.
Well, I'm thinking of this as being two pandemics. The one pandemic being COVID-19, and the other one being anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination, and they have overlapped. In our English classes, for example, we were able to pivot to move many classes online. We found that those who had lower levels of literacy faced major barriers with technology. so they need to carry on their classes via phone or individually in much more, if you will, slower fashion or more difficult fashion. But our teachers have been doing a valiant job there. As far as supporting the seniors, where we're senior wellness type groups, the group setups like this could be arranged where we would be able to have some members of the wellness group continue to meet and connect with each other. And that was really helpful to them and helped break some of their isolation. But many also found that they lacked the technology. Even if they had the knowledge or the information and the wherewithal, they just didn't ever see the need for the technology because they'd really rather walk to the grocery store and get something up, order something, go to the library if they needed to find out something. This was part of their retirement and their activity that they do. So there was a lot of learning that we had to go through there. We received a generous donation from Rogers Communications that was able to provide free tablets and data plans that we were able to support people with. But teaching someone how to use technology they have not had and doing that remotely while respecting social distancing is another challenge. So kudos to the staff that managed to get people online there. And then similar to what Angela and Laura spoke about, the pressure on staff in regards to knowing that you're working with a family that had violence in it, and that has now been all bottled up and contained in a virtual pressure cooker, was difficult for staff. And so we were able to slowly make our way back to those families and reconnect, find ways to be able to do so, provide other support such as immediate need type resources. But then we found a big gap when it came to serving and providing supports to international students. So we created an international students task force and discovered many had worked in a way that they didn't file tax returns last year, so they weren't eligible for one program. They weren't considered a Canadian student, not eligible for another program. Even if desperate, were considered a non-permanent resident, more closer to a visitor, even though they've been invited here by the institution in the country, so not eligible for Ontario Works. So you put all these barriers in front of people and say, there you go ahead, survive. And we saw enormous challenges there, and many parts of the system failed. And that was where we started spending more and more energy on advocating to say, okay, no, you can't let these people be so isolated. And in some cases, isolated in the one sense, but then 10 people in a house. So if COVID were to enter that home, it would move through very quickly. So we had to work through a great number of difficulties to get them the supports they needed themselves, international students, isolated seniors, and those facing violence in the home. The gaps in our systems did become very evident, and I'm proud of all of the teams that we helped lead for the work they managed to do.
Thank you, Gurpreet. And I think you're absolutely right. I think, what we saw through this pandemic was, what were maybe potentially systems with cracks in them really have those gaps widened. And also some of those very vulnerable populations who were disproportionately impacted or perhaps not even thought of before the pandemic really coming to the surface in need because there was no supports for them. So thank you so much for highlighting that as well. I'm going to pass it over to Effet at the Newcomer Centre of Peel, and if you can maybe share with us a little bit about your organization and some of the ways you've pivoted in order to ensure that you're still able to provide services.
Sure. So I already talked to you about our organization. We're not focusing on one group or demographic. It's a multicultural services that we provide. Last year, we provided to 138 countries with 98 languages that they spoke. So I didn't have the data for this year, but it's almost close at 15,000 newcomers on a yearly basis coming and knocking the door. Now there is no door, there is online. So I will talk about that part. But it's very very multicultural, and we are a charitable organization. We have some doors open to our emergency fund from Regional Peel United Way, Community Foundation of Mississauga, and Ontario government, and other governments, federal governments. So basically, we are really looking into every segment of the society and the community that we have, and then looking into who needs more. Seniors are the most vulnerable for now for us, and then we're very, very much close eye on them, and then we just knock the door and ask them what they need, and then we have some resources to help them. But overall, I just want to tell you that how human beings are so flexible. In March 17 at 2020, from morning to afternoon, one afternoon, we just flipped to the remote sort of a mood, by having, thousands of people coming, knocking the door and saying hello, with the face-to-face, all of a sudden, within one afternoon, done, I always talk to my manager. I say, you know what, we started the School of Life. This is not Newcomer Centre of Peel anymore. It's a School of Life because I started with all the managers, all the staff, all the clients, seniors, young, youth, young children. It started from the beginning to learn how to communicate with each other online, remotely. So we learned together, we made mistakes, we didn't know how to do it. So the School of Life is moving forward very nicely. So basically, right now we are really 100% remotely providing our services to our children. We have actually, as of next week, we will have summer camp for all the kids between JKSK till 12 years old, and our community connection with the youth, and they took over 13 years old to 18. So there's so many things that we are doing everything is online. And then I think I'm so pleased that we are not polluting environment, so we are not going out. We spend time with our kids and our family. We have so many young mothers and fathers that they need to take care of their families, and I pay attention to that. So maybe in the future, we will have sort of, I don't know, Gurpreet, maybe I'm saying something new, but something that, we combine doing in, face-to-face and online. Why not? Why should we all going to work, So this is something. But on the other hand, COVID-19 brought a lot of lesson to us. We learned so much, and then we suffered also all together. But I want to just wait for the moment if there's any other question that who are the heroes. We have lots of heroes in our community. I'm not looking for big heroes. I'm not looking for big heroes. Big heroes belong to, I don't know, Hollywoods maybe, or singers. But no, everyone who does something little, we have to consider that they are the heroes. So every week I send an email to my staff and the clients, and then I recognize these public little ones, all these people that they are doing amazing to others with the kindness and then compassion and then all the help that they provide. And I am one of them. I belong to that. But all of these things is just lovey-dovey talk. But there are issues, financial issues. There are our youth and children are missing their friends. If they ask youth, what is the most important you lost? I said, friends. They want their own friends. They want to see them. They want to talk to them. So women also and girls, they are. Laura said it very nicely and loudly. They are in trouble. And all men, actually, I always include men because I love them. I have 3 boys, so I cannot disconnect them. I want them to be educated. I want them to be I want them to be in the school of life with us, with women, with everybody. They should learn. They should pay attention to them. So maybe they're not bad really. Maybe they're anxious, emotionally anxious. Maybe they need emotional education. That's our job as educators. So we are doing many little things around the community to just make sure that our citizens, our community members are healthy and well, to live together happily. Otherwise, you cannot sleep at night if we have something in my culture say if you cannot sleep if your neighbor cannot sleep. That's my last things to say.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think, it's been a whirlwind for everyone, but, hopefully we have some questions around what we can do post-COVID, and hopefully you can share some of those interesting ideas as well, Efat. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Kenneth at the Labour Community Services of Peel to share a little bit more about your organization and how you've had to pivot to support your clients during the pandemic.
Thank you, Sarah. As I mentioned earlier, ours is a very unique organization because we do a lot of unique work in terms of, though it is very mundane, it might sound very mundane in terms of it is limited to only the legal affairs, the relating to employment law and the human rights, the EI, the WSIB, and the CPP. So we reach out to a diverse work population in the region of Peel, especially the non-unionized workers. We also provide consultation to assist newcomers, young people working the workforce, people in the middle ages, seniors who are at the retirement age. They're experiencing a lot of medical conditions and subsequently face differential treatment at workplace. And on some pretext or the other, they are let go by the employers. Right? So we have to be very sensitive to these people because all these has a lot of rippling effects in their whole family because it is a loss of income for a person. So we provide advocacy and training programs to our frontline workers in terms of how to deal, how to have an understanding in terms of the law, how the law works, how it operates. And for this, we have another program, the Know Your Rights program. And we are able to disseminate vital employment law and human rights information to newcomers. And in fact, as Ifat's organization, the Newcomer Centre of Peel, I myself have done outreach programs on human rights. And it has been attended by more than 50 to 100 people, newcomers. It was a very interesting program, human rights program I did in your organization. And as far as the pandemic is concerned, how it has affected it, yes, it has a tremendous effect in the society, especially at the workplace. And we as an organization have adapted to the changing times, and the changes have taken place, as Gurpreet rightly mentioned. They have never been envisaged before in our lifetime. We could never think about these kind of effects, and it was a change, an overnight change, which we all had to experience and cope up with, and especially the elderly, especially who did not have the knowledge of technology. They were foxed, in fact, how to deal with these kind of situations. So we had to be very sensitive and mindful how to deal with these people, how to help them overcome these kind of hurdles in terms of dealing with them. We ourselves as an organization strive to do so with minimum disruption of our services. We started working from home remotely. We started transferring of the office phones lines to our homes and adapted conference call styling for mediations, settlement of disputes with the Ministry of Labour and also with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. So it has been a long journey, but yes, we have and we shall be successful. We have succeeded so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. Again, everyone is adapting and evolving, and I thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to pass it over to Yasmin to share a little bit about how you all have had to adapt your services in order to ensure that clients are still receiving supports.
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of the innovative and creative ideas that many organizations have come up with have already been mentioned, and I'll just mention some of the difficulties that we faced. Of course, we are dealing with women and children that are fleeing abuse, and what we've noticed is definitely a huge spike, and this is something that we've noticed as an organization, but many reports have come out of Canada and other countries that there's been huge spikes, unfortunately, because like Laura mentioned, these women and children are stuck at home with their abusers, and it's very difficult to communicate with them because there's a huge lack of safe communication methods. So we found that we've had to start really creative ways of reaching out to them, whether it's through WhatsApp or web chat or sending emails or finding, times in the middle of the night where they can talk or things like that. We've had to get really creative. Of course, I mean, like Angela mentioned and like others mentioned, it has put a lot of strain on our staff who also are dealing with the pandemic. So we've had staff that had children that they can no longer come into work, or who have pre-existing health conditions, and they themselves had to be careful because unfortunately we can't do most of our work remotely. We have the homes, we have clients in the homes. It's not possible for us to do a lot of that remote work. But speaking of remote work, what we found is that although we're getting a huge increase of calls, a lot of people are hesitating even more in moving out. So we found that, normally we know that women attempt to leave an abusive relationship at least 7 times before they do. We found that it's gotten harder because they're scared of exposing themselves or exposing their children to anything, so they choose to wait in their abusive relationships, or they simply can't. We've had women that reach out to us and their partners have threatened to kill them, but they can't find the time to leave and they don't want to involve the police, or even when they call the police say, okay, we'll be there in 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours, and ultimately that puts them at more risk. So we've had a bit of a challenge with that, and thankfully we've been able to get funding to do more of our outreach casework. So what we've done is, instead of just telling these women, okay, well, call us when you're ready to move in, we are trying to provide them services where they're at. So doing a lot of our casework to cater to their needs where they're at, whether it's finding a job, or which has obviously been a challenge in the situation. It's not very easy to find a job right now. It's not easy to get their paperwork done. A lot of the women I mentioned are refugees or immigrants, and they're waiting on their work permits or their PRs or whatever it may be, and unfortunately it's not coming through because everything's on hold. So it's been a stressful time too in that sense, in the sense that, sorry, my son is here. Work from home. So it's been stressful for the clients too, in the sense that they everything's on hold. They can't even though we have a 3-month stay at our homes, it's been extended to 4, 5, 6 months because they're just not able to get their paperwork. Even though they want to, they're not able to get their paperwork. They're not able to find jobs. They're not even able to find places to rent. So it definitely increased the mental health challenges that they face. And obviously we have counselors that are trying to help, but it's been a challenge in that sense, and we've been trying to deal with each of those little challenges in specific ways. But I think Ifet has mentioned this, that there's been an amazing amount of creativity that has gone into finding solutions and adapting, really. That's what it's come down to.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Yasmin. I think, that's been kind of one of the silver linings through all of this, is the sort of innovations and creativity that, people and agencies and organizations have demonstrated in order to, make sure, again, that no one is left behind. Because, for a lot of people, they may not even understand how, someone who may be experiencing violence at home, how the pandemic would amplify that situation or compound concerns for them in that living arrangement. Not only during the pandemic, but as you aptly pointed out, Yasmin, after the pandemic, trying to get those supports and services to get out of the situation that you may be in will be very difficult for some. And so I thank you very much for highlighting all of those different concerns that come around as a result of that. And thank each of you for summarizing how you've adapted and how you're still trying to ensure that our community members are receiving the services and supports they need. So thank you for that. On that note, I'm going to pass it over to my co-host who's going to ask the next question.
Thank you, Sarah. Laura, can you tell us how your organization has experienced an increased demand for services during this pandemic?
Sure. So it's kind of been on multi-fronts. So we're managing those 200 folks that were high risk, and those became once or two times a week that we were in contact with them. We are restricted as professionals in terms of, because we provide services for those who experience sexual violence, there are restrictions as to what you can do over technology, unless it's in crisis situation, just to de-escalate the crisis. So we can't engage in our regular psychotherapy with people about their sexual victimization. So that's why we've expanded. And so the increased demand has come from general mental health concerns that we're working through, because the ones that we tend to get involve suicidal ideation and self-harming behaviors. Since I would say middle to the end of May, we've received about 3 to 5 calls a week over the racial trauma pieces and how that's embedded into violence against women and girls, and how one deals with that, with the tensions between and within the culture and systems of authority and oppression. So that has been an increased demand. There's also been an increased demand from the kids. So we were managing in our in-school programs, there were about 130 kids that we were managing on a regular basis, and several of those were also accessing our clinical services for other reasons. And what we have found in the kids that were in the program, they've required some additional supports. They've been reaching out to us through our crisis line and wanting to talk to clinicians. They're struggling, they're isolated, they're by themselves. If they're witnessing family violence, which is often the case, it's very challenging to even communicate with them, but they're afraid and they want it to stop. They're the ones calling the police, and the response just isn't there. And so we work with the youth in that regard. And then we have men. So on average, the amount of men we work with varies between about 6 to 15% of our service users, but we've been getting more of these men who are coming to us because they're abusers, but they've slipped under the radar of police so far, and they want to maintain that, and they want to address their anger management. So we've been getting, we're already intaking these individuals. We started to intake them last week, and we're already bringing them in for in-person assessments, but really spikes in areas we hadn't anticipated, but it's in the realm of trauma and mental illness, so we were able to just adjust accordingly. But I would say if we were to look at the increase in services, just the volume of calls has increased about 50%.
Wow. And I hear it every day that, with regards to mental health and domestic abuse, and since COVID, there has been an increase. And I think that's why, when we have panel discussions like this, we hear more about, all the work that's being done behind the scenes and all the new work, as you had alluded to, like the men that have slipped under the radar, and, they require, help and assistance as well. Mental health is something that's not going away. It doesn't discriminate, and it needs to be addressed. So thank you for that. Gurpreet, how has your organization experienced increased demand for services during this pandemic?
Well, in addition to what the others have said, we've seen those gaps that I mentioned earlier. that they've really driven the demand for increased service. Yes, it took a while, and we're still not expert, but moving many of our programs online or to a virtual format happened and is working. Kits are being sent out for seniors who have cognitive impairments, so then they're able to do arts projects, and then they're able to convene online with others, and then go through activities they normally do face to face. So a lot of those can happen, but in the area of gaps, that I do feel is where we found, if you will, an increased challenge. An example of a gap. We discovered that the Meals on Wheels programs in Mississauga and Halton, they redefined them and said, okay, these Meals on Wheels programs are available. Do you have any questions? And the question we asked was, what would a South Asian or Afro-Caribbean or Chinese person do? Who do they contact for a culturally appropriate meal? Just point out who it is, and we'll start directing people that way. And we've been told for years that this was being managed. It wasn't. It isn't. You can't get those meals. They've been working on it, and that is racism right there. But on top of that, a funding system that then, when emergency dollars came through the federal government to the Ontario Community Support Agency and to others, they decided within that structure, within that system, to only give funds to existingly funded organizations that were currently funded to do Meals on Wheels. So let me get that straight. You not only aren't providing it, but now that there's an emergency, the emergency dollars will not go towards it. And then they have the gall to turn around and ask ourselves and other leading organizations like Punjabi Community Health Services and others that work in this area, well, what can you help us sort this out? And my answer was, if you haven't been able to find an Indian restaurant that can help with catering in Mississauga, you've been working very, very hard to not find such a thing. So a big piece of our work has been trying to educate the system to what they've been doing wrong. We saw this at the Peel Board of Education and the streaming of young people and the impacts that was having. And so what does that impact have now with that young person that couldn't be in that extra class, that doesn't have access to those extra tutors, that doesn't have the extracurricular and all the other things that one pandemic layered on top of another pandemic have created? So in many regards, the service side, the professionals that are in each of our organizations have figured out how to reach out, over challenged and with sometimes a great personal psychic cost to themselves, but they figured that out. It's these gaps. What do we do about men's violence? What do we do about a policing system, a mental health system, school boards that are non-responsive to the community? And so we've struggled there. As a newly minted United Way anchor agency, we wish to be able to make clear that it's our taxpayers' dollars that are funding these systems. How can it be that these systems find a way to not provide those services back to us? And that's taken up much more bandwidth, much more energy, much more effort to convince, to explain, to help understand, than have some of the other aspects, which have also been hard. So that's what the thought I'd like to leave you with as far as a pivot. It's like, hang on, there's something structurally wrong here that we need to get right. And together, these agencies that you see on screen here, working in our own areas and across, we're beginning to make that difference, but we need more help.
Yes. And as you said, education is the key. And sometimes you'll have to say it maybe once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times, but eventually someone has to hear it. It cannot just continue to fall on deaf ears. So some really good points.
Jackie, I appreciate your optimism there, but I've just touched my 30th year of service, most of it around Peel and Human Services.
Yes.
You and I and Angela and all of us have said this over and over again.
Mhm.
They've chosen not to hear us. Now we're not as shy to call them out on it.
Yes.
So they're being called out. Stop being racist. Stop hurting us.
Yes.
Help us help each other.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, Capri. Ifat, can you tell us how your organization has experienced an increase for demand for services during this pandemic?
Sure. I think I have to add to my colleagues around the table. They mentioned so many things that I will not repeat it, but the amount of the emails and calls and WhatsApps and then Skypes and all these online, it's really increased. And I just want to tell you that seniors are really in deep hardships. We all know that in terms of the financial situation, food, they are not mobile, they cannot get out. There's so many abusive situations around seniors. We see it, we hear it, all the stories that it's not very pleasant to just even mention it. Our children are restless, and then the helplines, as my colleague said, for kids are doubled and tripled. They call the authorities, and youth are missing their activities, and they are not in a good mental health situation. So we know that women and girls are having difficulty to cope with their own home environment, such as violence and abuse. And Laura mentioned it very nicely in depth. So I don't want to go through that. Financial disparity cause adversity most of the newcomer families. So newcomer families really they don't speak well English. They don't know enough culture, Canadian culture, Western culture. They have to learn this kind of acculturation issues. So their work is not real work. It's just a part-time here and there, and then finding a job now is more difficult than ever for our newcomers. And then this really brings all these things that overall, not only one layer of the family, not only, let's see, women and children or youth or senior, all levels, even children cannot elaborate on their mental well-being, but they are mentally really stressed. So we know that. So I think we all have responsibility. I really believe in education, and I really believe in talking and educating and bringing the whole family together and talk to them. I am responsible, and I make my colleagues at the Newcomer Centre of Peel really responsible to just tackle all these things. But the issues are around right now, and it's so overwhelming and so fast so far. So that's what I wanted to mention on this one, Jackie.
And in fact, you've made some really good points there, because our seniors are vulnerable, and there's a common thread with all of our panelists that have had an opportunity to speak today with regard to our new norm that's happening, our children being restless and having to adapt and change and not being able to see their friends and do the things that they would normally do. So like, I hear you, but I guess it's just, I guess we just we're forced to look at things and do things, and I don't think we're going to ever be able to go back to the old way of doing things. This is our new normal, and it's a change and it's an adjustment that everyone has to face, but it doesn't take away the fact that the challenges that were there before are still the challenges that we face today. So thank you for that, Afat. Kenneth, can you tell us how your organization has experienced an increase in demand for services during this pandemic?
Jackie, I am really glad that you brought this up today. In these critical times, we have come across a substantial increase in the number of calls that we are receiving. And it is primarily due to the increasing demand and the required assistance by the people who are left clueless there has been a paradigm shift in the way people live their life. It is a new normal for them. And this new normal, especially for the seniors, especially for those people who do not have that kind of an access to technology, for them, it is a very difficult way to deal with life. This is a new normal which they have never envisaged ever in their or experienced in their lifetime. And to top it all, finance at home constitutes a major component to run a family. And when the finances of a family are hit, they are hit the hardest. It is a rippling effect. The whole family is affected by it. And that is what we have seen here that is affecting. And in the wake of all the employers cutting costs, cutting their overheads, it is affecting the employees. They are being let go on some pretext or the other. And sometimes these challenging times, we have seen us rely heavily on technology like never ever before.
Yes.
And as you said rightly, this is the new normal. A new normal. We as an organization, we have succeeded in disseminating information through outreach programs, and as Efrat rightly said, paying emphasis on education, advocacy, educating people through Know Your Rights program, educating about the law, educating about what their rights are in terms of jobs, what their employer can do and cannot do, and what he's doing is right, what he's doing is not right. You know, we have all these kind of questions coming up. Oh, can the employee do this? Is it safe? It is not a safe working environment for me. Do I have a health issue? Should I go for work or should I not go for work? These kind of situations these questions plague employees, whether they could go back. And they have vulnerable people staying at home, elders staying at home, whether they can really go back to work. So these kind of situations we have been facing, the employees have been facing, and they've been calling us. Can I go back to work? Should I go back to work? What are my rights here? What do I do? So these challenging times have come up with a lot of challenging issues which we have to deal with, and a lot needs to be done, as Gurpreet rightly said.
Point well taken. Thank you for that, Kenneth. You hit on a lot of different points and very valid points. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yasmin, can you tell us how your organization has experienced an increase for demand for services during this pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as mentioned earlier, unfortunately, we've seen our calls more than double. I mean, we used to receive at least around 200 calls a week. Now we receive more than 400. And unfortunately, on the flip side, we're receiving a lot of these calls from women needing help but not able to come to the home itself. So we've definitely had to adapt, as mentioned before, to that increased demand because we're seeing a lot of the demand coming in from people that need help remotely. So whether it's, just financial assistance, because again, these women are in vulnerable situations. A lot of times they're being denied basic necessities. I think Laura mentioned this, we've had women call us and tell us that they're being denied food. And we have to try and find ways of getting them food or getting them their medical necessities, hygiene, cleaning supplies. When the whole pandemic started, we did a whole campaign to raise money and purchase food and food hampers and hygiene kits and cleaning supplies, and we were overwhelmed. We had more than 1,000 in just a week, 1,000 requests coming in from Peel region alone. And it was hard because we couldn't find the supplies for that too. Obviously everything was, in the beginning, everything was sold off all the racks in the stores. So I think that we've definitely seen a huge increase in people needing every kind of service, whether it's in home, outside of the home, mental health, just support and accessing resources. A lot of, we mentioned that a lot of seniors have a hard time, maybe using technology and such. When we're dealing with immigrants and newcomers and refugees, a similar struggle exists because a lot of the resources out there are in English, and they might not have access to that that resource, even though it's available to them on the computer, they can't
Mm-hmm.
access it because it's not available in the language that they need. So a lot of times it's just us literally on the phone helping them, navigate things, trying to find resources, trying to translate things for them just so that they can access what they need to get by.
Wow. Thank you for that, Yasmin, because I mean, when I listen to Laura and I listen to you and I hear about the increase, and I know that there was an increase of domestic violence before COVID-19, and then just to think and reflect on the fact that you have individuals that are in their homes with these abusers and they can't leave, and like you just mentioned that, being denied food, that's like a necessity of life. Like, how can that be? It's just, it's just mind blowing. The work that the agencies, the panelists and the agencies that are not here to speak, that are doing this work on the ground, and you just don't hear about it. And I'm just glad that you're here on this panel to share your story. So thank you very much. Angela, what has your organization experienced? How has your organization experienced an increase for demand for services during this pandemic?
Like many of the others, we had similar kind of issues. But one thing we found that in the areas of food and hygiene products and stuff like that, and we were successful in being able to get a funding through the region of Peel, United Way, Greater Toronto area through the seniors, the New Horizon for Seniors. We were able to get what Gurpreet talked about, culturally appropriate meals for our seniors. That's one thing they were crying out for. We were able to do it for a period of over about 10 weeks. And, obviously money goes that far. So we are looking at how else we can work, we've been able to get some gift cards to be able to give them that they can buy some stuff that they can prepare their own kind of meals. And actually I have to give a shout out as well to the Toronto Region Conservation Area. They really, they had some lunches and they were able to help where they help for the women in our program, and they were so grateful for those. Food was a big problem, really, that food scarcity. A lot of the people, they didn't have, well, the seniors on limited income, and they, but they still always supplemented with other things. But the women especially and the youth were the ones we found to be really hard put when it came to the food. So we were in helping to get gift cards and making deliveries and doing that extra work to try to help them in those areas, because that's where the demand and stuff was. Yes, we got an increase in calls because of all of these issues that the others talked about. But I'll tell you, one of the other increases on us was the increase on us as ADs and as staff to sit at tables to discuss these issues, to really push and advocate and fight and explain what is happening. And I mean, even on the race-based, the data collection for race-based, for COVID, we had to be pushing and fighting and writing letters. All of that is extra work. We've been doing it before, but extra work to say, listen, it is this crucial time now. We need to get this type of information. We need this. We're pushing on the police, pushing on the SIU. So we've been spending more time, right, ourselves, really working above and beyond the day-to-day of trying to advocate and saying, listen, these gaps here are expanding. We've been talking about them for years, but look at the gaps that are really now become crevices. They've become now canyons because of the COVID that is just taken the mask off of a lot of, no pun intended, off of a lot of stuff that we've been talking about for years, and really show the underbelly of what we are working with on a daily basis. It's really highlighted how bad the situation is in some cases and how it's gotten worse because of the pandemic. So that is one of the areas where we have had to spend a lot of our time in trying to work and fix a lot of things that could have been fixed before.
And when you talk about food and shelter, and you talk about culturally specific food, that's basic necessities. That's just a no. That's just an absolute no, along with all the other things. And Gurpreet had also spoke to this as well. But I mean, my mother, she's in her 70s, and if she can't come and live with me, because she has that culturally specific diet as well, I don't know what she would do if she had to eat food that was not food that she was used to. Do you know what I'm saying? And these are the small things that help our vulnerable seniors, make them happy, I should say. Just having a meal that they can identify with, something that they've eaten all their lives, and that shouldn't be too hard to give them, So thank you for that, Angela. And thank you, everyone that answered these questions. They're I've learned so much, very insightful. But I'm going to hand the next set of questions over to my co-host, Sarah, to take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And yes, thank you to all the panelists. I think each one of you highlighted different challenges that your organizations faced in terms of the increased demand. But I think each of you also highlighted the challenges that were present before COVID and how the pandemic really amplified those concerns for community members here in the Peel region. I know we talked a lot about, service wait times, for example, and when we think of our region and how underfunded we have been for so long, I know none of you on this table are a stranger to the need for fair share here in Peel. When we have something like a pandemic then take place, when you have organizations who haven't been funded at the rate that they need to provide services to the community, that's only going to be amplified during a crisis like this. And so when you see the demand, which was already increasing in our community for racialized, newcomers, for example, access to food has been a huge concern across the region. Those concerns weren't going to go away during a pandemic. They were, in fact, going to be amplified. And that's exactly what we saw. So in addition to the immediate service that you might be providing, you also all noted that there were other wraparound services that people needed that may or may not have been there for the community. And I think, none of us want to go back to the way things were. Because I think, as we've aptly all identified on this call, systems have been broken. They were broken before a pandemic, and we have an opportunity now. As a policy scholar, we call these the policy windows, right? Where something is happening in the world that creates this opportunity to change policy and to provide the right solution. And I think that's where we are in history right now. And I really hope, that as an opposition member, but I hope that the government will start to listen and use this as an opportunity to start to legislate real changes to provide the frontline supports that are actually needed in our communities. I think for all of us, we know that change is needed, and I think we're at a point where it's like enough is enough. And to Gurpreet's point, we've been making noise. We're going to continue to get a little bit louder, I think, and write more of those letters and be a little bit bolder in our asks, because I think we need to be. On that note, I think, many people are viewing the global pandemic as a good time to actually hit that reset button and, rethink how we are doing things, especially in terms of how organizations and community supports are provided funding. Are there funding changes that you would like to see in a post-pandemic world that would help transform how your organization operates? And has there been any opportunities to develop unique partnerships? I'm just conscious of the time. I know we're nearing the end, so I'll throw that blanket question out there. What type of supports do you want to see provided after the pandemic, and what unique opportunities have presented themselves? Maybe we'll start with you, Gurpreet.
Well, something that Angela and myself and several other groups are involved with is the Peel Children's Aid Society. It's an institution that in other jurisdictions has been accused of being part of the problem. But in Peel, the Peel CAS work under the ACOMA project with Roots and BCAN and other organizations, and under the SOTH project, with SOTH meaning together, with Indus Community Services, to see what they could do to transfer resources from the institution to the community agency, so the community agency could provide a cultural lens that got a better outcome for the child and the family at the end of the process. So that is a living example of how an institution can engage with the community. So a suggestion we've heard, and I personally think is workable, is a reduction in funding to large organizations like the police. And with that money being reduced, I would say a portion of those funds, someone said with a 10% reduction, a 4% move of those funds to domestic violence support, family violence supports, all of the things that Laura and Yasmin and others do. Another 4% to culturally appropriate mental health supports. So then the police officer is not the first person who's necessarily at that door, but there is someone who understands the culture and understands the psychology and the supports needed to be able to be a helping hand as opposed to an enforcing hand. And then to round out that 10%, the 2% would go towards anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination projects throughout the region, throughout the systems, throughout the mental health system, throughout the education system, throughout policing, throughout the other large institutions, to see what can be done as a community to make things work better. That's what I think would be a wonderful policy window.
Thank you for that. And, I think all of us on this call can agree that I think we can be looking at ways that we can really be investing in community to help prevent perhaps some of the upstream activities that our police officers need to engage with. But that does come by investing in our community supports first and foremost. So thank you, Gurpreet, for highlighting that. I'm going to pass it over to Effat.
Yes, I think, if I put my research hat, just talk about countries or areas that they flourish and they are so on the top of other Western society or good societies, all the resources goes to the community level, not at the big institutions. We don't have it. I'm just building on the conversation that Gurpreet started. If we have a clinic or we have, let's say, mental health specialist or crisis intervention, or even the nurses, down to the community, attached to Gurpreet's organization, my organization, Angela's, or Laura and Yasmin, or anybody, it works much, much better than, because people who come to us, after a while, they started to build up trust and they believe in us, what we do. That trust keep people going and then getting much better education, lifestyle, and the learning, all the school of life that I'm just saying that, learn how to live, get education, raise your children, live with your wife and husband, or how to have the good love relationship, all these things. It has to go down to the community. That's one thing I believe in it. And then second thing that I just, when you asked the question, I was thinking about the funding that we had pre-COVID, and all the fundings, it's in the very thick box or bubble that has so much structure that you cannot use this for that, you cannot use this. It's just a structure so rigidly that you cannot even move, you cannot do anything. Founders should come up with the idea that every organization, maybe pandemic comes after another 5 years or 2 years, maybe we never get out of this. We have to have ability to utilize our resources in a way that we can help our clients and our families that they need us. This is one thing. And the third thing that I want to say is about now what? We learn so much remotely, working, online, and then talking, and then there's so many technology that came out, and then we are using it, which is very nice actually. We have to utilize this kind of ability to have a blending services. Means that you don't have to just, classes. Government of Canada told us that every English language classes should have not less than 20 students. Also, they ask 5 extra registration. Means, you're a good girl if you have 25 students in one room. Come on, right now, you cannot even put more than 10 people in any cases or children. So that has to be really changed. The mindset of our politicians should change. Our politician, unfortunately, is very detached with the reality of the communities, and never ever in the history of humankind life, that one book, one policy in a sitting in a bedroom of one person can change the world. So you have to get together in organization, institution, work together in the community. Otherwise, we will be stuck in the same place that we've been there before.
Thank you for that, Effet. I think, as I think all agree, the status quo has got to go, and so we're all working together to try to change that. So I think hopefully this conversation doesn't end tonight, and that these conversations continue on how we're able to work together, because I think the opportunity and the time is now for us to figure out how we can better integrate the work that we're all doing. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass it over to Kenneth, if you can share a little bit from your perspective. Kenneth is just on mute. He's
Thank you,
unmuted.
Sarah.
There we go.
As we all know. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Rightly so, the age-old issue of funding is nothing new to any of us. We are all used to it. And those seeking funding must go through the whole application process with various funders. The application process is very time-consuming, especially for agencies with complex mandates and not enough staff. It is a wake-up call now for all. Since we are contemplating to hit the restart button, I would like to highlight 3 issues. Number 1, since we are all in this together, let us work more closely together going forward. With number 1, centralize the application process has been on the wish list of all community service providers for many years. Centralize the application process. Number 2, bridging the extremely wide gap of organizations with limited resources available and the community seeking access to justice. There is an urgent need at this point in time to create partnerships, ensure non-duplication of services in assigned areas, where funders could work in tandem to bridge this gap and ensure effective usage of funds and provide efficient services to the community at large. As we all know, this pandemic has changed the entire world as we see today. Government all over the country, all over the world, including Canada, be it at all levels, federal, provincial, municipal, we all have done our work. Though it is a non-political discussion here today, but yes, the governments have played a political role, respectively, but a lot more needs to be done. And we are not out of the woods as yet. I would wish for increased and proactive participation in terms of providing increased funding for the not-for-profit organization, who are the real eyes, ears, and the hands of the vulnerable, the needy, the distressed in getting justice. Since we stand by the Peel Regional Labour Council's motto, injury to one is an injury to all. So that being said, I conclude on this.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. I think, the notion of solidarity is an important one. And, the more we're united, the stronger we are. So thank you for sharing that. Over to you, Yasmin.
Yeah, I think I definitely echo everyone else's statements, 100% working together, trying to find ways of collaborating. And in terms of funding, I think Gurpreet had mentioned this earlier, definitely for funders to start looking at funding the organizations they don't normally fund. And we've seen this happen all the time pre-COVID, and I'm seeing it happen now, although some organizations, because we operate outside of Peel too, we've seen a lot of organizations across Canada make an effort to fund the new organizations or organizations that don't normally receive funding, but we haven't seen that much happen here, unfortunately. We've seen the same status quo in terms of that funding, and I think it's important to realize that a lot of these organizations are coming to us, and a lot of these funders are coming to us asking us for help and yet not funding us. And then what ends up happening is we don't have the capacity or the resources to be able to sustain everything that's needed. And so I think it's very important that the funding needs to be reassessed, and the way it's provided, the way the applications are done, and the way that we are able to access funding is more equitable and is more fair to all organizations, especially those that are on the ground and doing the work. And in addition to that, I think we've seen a lot of the gaps that exist. For some reason, during COVID, a lot of the gaps have become much more apparent. And I think one of the biggest things, and we're trying to push and advocate for this along with other organizations, is the need for anti-oppression and cultural sensitivity trainings for all kinds of public service representatives. So that includes police, that includes teachers, that includes members of parliament, that includes everyone really. There needs to be more awareness, there needs to be more education. They need to understand, especially when you're talking about a region like Peel, where we're so diverse, there needs to be that understanding when it comes to the service providers and it comes to the public sector.
Thank you for that. I think, such an important point, because if we can't identify what the problem is, how are we to frame the appropriate solution? And I think, for a lot of, especially, working in Parliament, even just having people understand how oppression is impacting people in our communities, how, the intersections of people's identities come together and they experience systems differently is a challenge. And I think, starting with the education is such an important part of this conversation, because if we can't acknowledge the problem, we won't be able to frame the right solution. So I thank you very much, Yasmin, for highlighting that, and the need to fund innovations. I think that's an important part in all of this. We've seen so much innovation happen and so many outside of the box ideas come forward. But at the end of the day, if there aren't dollars behind these projects and grassroots community initiatives or frontline services, people will not get the supports they need, and that has an economic consequence immediately, but also in the long term as well. And I think that's very important to note. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Over to you, Laura, for the last word on this question.
Thank you very much. I think I would echo the sentiments of what others, but I think, Gurpreet, you were being a little too generous with the 10% for defunding. I was thinking more in the 50% range, but whatever. Because we look at it from a feminist perspective, where 50% of homicides in Peel are femicides. That's not acceptable. We have a 0.6% report rate for sexual violence in Peel. Are you kidding me? The average is 5%. This is not acceptable. Police are non-responsive and they're not interested in changing, besides which they're in the lines of work that they shouldn't be in, because that's better suited for community to deal with. So I think that's kind of the one piece. The other piece I would add would be, where's the feminist policy stance on this? How come we're not actively saying we're feminists and we're intersectional feminists, and most of the essential workers are women? Women get paid 73% of what men get paid. That's if they're white. When we add Black women, I think it falls down to 66%. Indigenous women is even lower. This is not acceptable. 200 years is the trajectory that it's going to take if we keep doing what we're doing now in order to get that parity. That's not acceptable. So we need to say, we want feminist policy. It needs to guide all decisions, and women and girls need to be at the forefront, because when women and girls succeed, societies succeed. End of discussion. Now figure it out and fund research that is on women and girls. Stop funding research that's on men and trying to genericize it to the rest of the population. That is also not acceptable. And so we've now set into a default position that white men are the default of how we design our programs and our services and government. And that is not okay. That is not who we are in this country anymore. Hopefully we weren't like that before, but it's time. I think that I would agree, our voices are going to be a lot louder because there's great work out in BC. The Feminist Policy Institute is doing fabulous work about how to move these things forward. So we have the expertise and the resources in this country to do this, and we have all of us sitting around at the community saying, hello, we're ready, we'll hit the ground running, we're here to help. I think we just need the government of all levels and all funders to come together and recognize the need.
Thank you for that, Laura. And I think recognize the need and be ready to implement the solutions is a big part of this conversation. I think we can have all the conversations we want about what needs to be done, but until the people that are running this province, who have a majority government, will actually implement those changes, it's unfortunately going to continue the way that it is. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to have a feminist lens. There should be a gendered perspective to how we're understanding the pandemic, but more importantly, how we're developing policy. Again, going back to it all stems in how we view and frame those problems. And if we don't understand that, that women, maybe women of color, or Black women may experience things, if all of those sort of nuances of our identities are not taken into consideration, unfortunately, we will just continue to have the status quo perpetuated. But I think you've all highlighted that the time for change is now, and we need to continue pushing forward. If anything COVID has taught us is that, there are real inequities in our province and here in the Peel region. Those became very apparent throughout this pandemic. Systems were broken, and I think that has been very aptly highlighted through this conversation, but was very clear throughout this pandemic, whether that was long-term care, whether that was our emergency shelter system, whether that was food security here in the province, or underlying issues of poverty, which have been growing. Those were all amplified throughout this pandemic, and different groups experienced the pandemic very differently. And I think we've highlighted that through the conversation. But despite the challenges, each and every single one of your organizations has risen to the occasion and ensured that vulnerable people in our communities continue to receive the supports that they needed in a way that was dignified, in a way that is culturally appropriate. We're home to one of the most diverse communities in the province, across Canada, frankly. And so the fact that we can even have conversations about the need for culturally appropriate services is also very important. So I just want to thank you all for the work that you're doing on the ground every single day, not just during a pandemic, but 365 days a year. Many of you have been operating in our communities for decades and, have been growing with us as our community has grown as well. So thank you, just from the bottom of my heart, as a longtime Bramptonian. I understand our community is changing, and I just want to thank you all for making sure that everyone feels welcomed and has the supports that they need in the place that they call home. On that note, I'm going to wrap us up for the evening. This was such a delightful conversation. I personally learned so much. I know, Jackie, you mentioned you did too.
I did.
And, you know, I think we're all learning from each other, and that's a part of this conversation. And I hope that if we all learn anything out of what we've experienced through a global pandemic, is that when we work together, we can get through things together. And I think that's been the silver lining, is that the innovations, the way community has come together, the way grassroots organizations have come together in order to make sure that everyone is being taken care of as best we can, is really sort of the beautiful side of humanity that we want to be seeing. And I think the other piece that we saw is that we understand that the time to act is now. We cannot wait any longer. We cannot wait for another crisis. Systems that have been underfunded, when a crisis occurs, obviously issues become amplified. So I think the other piece has been that we need to continue advocating, and we will continue to push to make sure that community services and supports are provided. Because when we do that, and when we take care of our community first, that's how we're building healthy citizens, healthy community, and a healthy economy, frankly, as well. And so it is very important that we do that. And as we talk about a post-COVID recovery plan, it cannot involve us going back to the way things were. And I think that's been very clear through the conversation we've had today, is that none of us want to go back to the way things are. We want to envision a new future, a brighter future, a better future for everyone, where services are provided in an equitable way, and that everyone can live their best lives in a manner that they feel safe and they are dignified. And I think that's what we're going to continue to work for. And so while we've gone through collectively, you know, quite an ordeal, a traumatic experience with a pandemic, I think that there's hope at the end of the tunnel in terms of what we can achieve. And I hope that we can continue to have this conversation to build up our community and make sure that we are all getting what we need. So thank you so much for, you know, taking the time out on a Wednesday afternoon to have this conversation with us. I really appreciate it. I want to wish you all well and be safe. And if there's anything that my office can do, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I want to thank again Jackie so much for being a part of this, and to each one of the panelists, thank you again for taking the time out. Is there any last words from anyone before we wrap up?
There's always hope.
Thank you, Sarah.
Wonderful. No, this was a great conversation. I look forward to continuing, and hopefully we'll get to meet again in the very near future and continue the advocacy that we all know needs to happen in our community. You know, Peel is a beautiful, vibrant place to call home, whether you're in Mississauga, Brampton, or Caledon. We're diverse, we're dynamic, and I want to see us grow and thrive, and that involves making sure that we have the appropriate supports for our growing community, whether that's mental health, whether that's emergency shelter services, or whether that's making sure that we have adequate supports to culturally appropriate food. You know, all of those are elements we need to consider. And I look forward to having those conversations as we move forward and navigate a post-COVID world. So thank you again, everyone. I want to wish you all the best. Thank you so much to everyone watching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone watching,
Thank you.
get in touch with us. Take care, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.